Welcome to the Beyond Pain podcast with your host, Joe Gambino and Joe LaVacca. Join the two Joes, two physical therapists, as they discuss how to navigate the uncertainties of pain so you can move beyond it and get back to the activities you love most. This podcast is for Joe, and their guests to share their clinical thoughts and ideas based on their collective clinical experiences. Can this information be for you? Maybe, but we cannot know for sure. Therefore, it is always worth talking to your healthcare provider to make the best decisions in your care before you implement anything on this podcast. And please use common sense.
Welcome back into the Beyond Pain podcast. I am one of your hosts, Joe Gambino. I'm here with our other host, Joe LaVacca. You can find us both on Instagram at Joe Gambino DBT for myself, at Strength and Motion _PT for LaVacca over there. Podcast is on Instagram, Beyond Pain Podcast, and on YouTube if you want to watch along, Cups of Joe _PT. And after 3 weeks or 4 weeks of not recording, Joe, I think I still got the intro.
You got it. You nailed it. Look, everyone gets a little summer vacation. We just had ours, and it is nice to be back. I will tell you one thing I learned from vacation. Raising a family of 4 in the Northeast, particularly New York City area, will cost you just as much as any exotic vacation that you could ever imagine. So when we were all together, we spent a couple days upstate. That was very nice. We spent a couple days in Pittsburgh. Very nice. But we really only had to pay for accommodations for 2 nights of like the 10 days we were together because we were at my place or her family's place. And it was still, I think, more expensive than our Greece trip coming up for 10 days, in which we're working with our travel agent and we're like, hey, we're 40 and 50. We want to go all out. We want this to be a celebration. We want the nicest hotels, the nicest everything. And apparently that's still less expensive than just trying to feed 2 teenage girls and apparently take them shopping a couple times. So that was an eye-opener. So I was thinking about you and your beautiful family of 4 and how vacations will probably be in your future as well. And it really made me feel bad for you, Joe, and other listeners out there with 2, 3, 4 or more kids. God bless you. And just realize that you are doing way bigger things than I ever could with that family. It's insane. Absolutely insane.
Yes. Well, we're going to Chicago on Tuesday, and then we'll be in New York. And one of my clients said that if we don't get a selfie together, she's going to be extremely disappointed.
All right, well, we got to make that happen. We got to make that happen. I will travel to the city, even if I'm not scheduled to be there, to take that selfie with you, buddy.
Okay. Yeah, we'll figure it out. I'm still not exactly sure what our schedule looks like in New York, but we'll make it happen. I will definitely have a city day. I like to come by and see a bunch of people, so we'll do it. But what are we talking about today, Joey boy?
Well, I think interestingly enough, as we were chatting off air, we had similar experiences the past couple weeks with doctor recommendations in the rehab process. And I was really excited to talk to you about this because I think in reflecting, this has happened many times, probably too many times. And I have some opinions on it, but I'm just going to start it with the framing of the question. How much should doctors be involved in the rehab management of their clients, in specifically giving suggestions to cease all activity or all motion or all loading, and maybe even the other pendulum? Like, should they be able to call us and be like, hey, why isn't Joe squatting and doing single leg work? So we'll leave it open-ended and we'll maybe share our cases and we'll go from there. But I wanted to get your thoughts on where is the line, and if there's a line in the rehab process for clients.
Yes, I think it's a hard question because I think at the bottom of it, right, it's our clients' ability. You know, they're the ones who get to determine what they should and should not do at the end of the day, right? So, you know, if doctor says this and we say this, and they decide who they, like where they want to go, I think mainly, I don't necessarily know if I'm like not okay with it, but it just needs to like make clinical sense. And I feel like, we talked like there's kind of like a hierarchy in medicine, right? The doctor, what they say is always going to be taking very strongly and over probably the PT's opinion in something. My experience has shown that, and whether or not that's right or wrong, I don't know. I'm not going to push the needle on one or the other, but I think it still needs to make clinical sense. And where I find myself mostly is whatever information they get from the doctor, I find myself either confirming or giving them another way of thinking about things. And then therefore they can go out and make the decision whether or not what they should do, right? I think that the client needs to be the one to make that decision, and I can push them, right? But I'm not going to force them in any decision one way or another. I know we both have cases very recently, so I'll give you an opportunity to talk about your side of things. I think you feel a little bit more strongly than I do. And then we could talk about the specific scenarios and then maybe what people listening to this podcast can or should be thinking about when they navigate this situation.
Sure. I think there was a couple of great things you said. Number one, I love the idea of clinical sense. But for it to be clinical sense making, I think there has to be a collaboration. If you and I have a difficult client that is not responding to progressive overload or movements, or maybe having such a mismatch response to progressive overload or movements, then yes, I think there needs to be more chatter between the healthcare team. I will tell you that in New York City, this almost rarely ever happens. I have reached out to countless doctors, countless trainers, and I could probably count on one hand the amount of people who have actually even acknowledged my email back. Now, this is a problem because, as you said or hinted at, there is this hierarchy that, hey, Joe, I'm going back to my doctor because I'm still in pain, and I'm going to take my doctor's advice because, well, here's the quote, you're not a doctor. Yeah, I know. I'm not a doctor. That's why I don't do surgeries. That's why I don't do injections. That's why I don't prescribe dosage of medication. However, I'm a physical therapist. I am the specialist in your rehab plan. So therefore, I probably should have a say, or we should have a say in what's going on in that plan to help guide you to your best goals. The other thing I think you said, which I like, or it made me think of, is there's this pendulum, right? And there's good and bad advice on both ends of the coin. So you can have plenty of, poor PTs or just PTs who have poor time management. They're just too overloaded, where a patient goes back to their doctor and the doctor's asking, how's rehab going? What are you doing there? And they may say, oh, I just sit on a hot pack. I get massaged. I get the tingly vibrating unit on my shoulder or my knee, and then I go home. Well, then, yeah, I think it is within the doctor's right to say, hey, well, we need to load this. We know that you have to, push this tendon or push this ligament repair or, just start to get in better conditioning. Hey, we should probably have a conversation with your PT. The case that I had was kind of the opposite. So I just started working with this one client. I'd only seen him one time. He has been battling some pain for quite some time, a few years. He had a surgery. Things haven't been going the way that he wanted. Now we started on some just like really just easy, gentle band work. But you and I know easy, gentle does not mean you're not going to have a ton of soreness the next day or possibly a flare, a few days from now as you keep doing it, right? So there's the art of rehab. He started on most of those things right as I was going away on vacation. And I just caught one last email from him before I left saying, hey, my hip was pretty sore. I'm wondering if I should change anything. And I honestly told him the same thing I tell most people. There's too little data to overreact. You had some soreness for a day or two. That's fine. I might count that as like a normal response. I usually will go down my checklist. Did you cancel any, plans with friends? Did you not sleep? Could you not go to work? Like some like kind of like really big change in behavior, not just soreness. And then my typical advice is, well, if you didn't change behavior and it's just sore, that's, maybe typical. Why don't we like try to get one or two additional data points and see just how sore is sore? Well, went on vacation. I didn't see any missed emails from him, but when I returned, I got this. His doctor recommended he take a 3-week break from exercise and PT and gave me painkillers to try. I'm seeing her again in 3 weeks to check on these pain levels. And then if better, she wants to give me another prescription for PT. Now, the other sort of like caveat here was in the event he still had pain in 3 weeks, she was going to offer cortisone injections and now kind of escalating the process. So for a client who's had pain for years, why would he suddenly be pain-free with just deloading for 3 weeks? He's an athlete. So I was able to have this sort of conversation about, well, when in your life has it ever been good to take 3 or 4 weeks off to get stronger, more aerobically fit, work towards your goals? And we don't even have to have the conversation about athletics. It could be your life. Did you ever take 3 weeks off from being a husband, a dad, a graphic designer, or whatever your job is, and then come back and be like, wow, I'm so much better for taking that break and doing absolutely nothing and not working on my identity and not working on my profession. So I'll pause there. Is that similar to your story that you've had? And then we can maybe share some counterpoints on how we handled it.
Mm, yeah. It was an interesting case. So like he had some pain in his foot. We like started like he was having some problems with running. We had some time. We started doing some plows, and he was doing okay. Things were feeling fine. And then he stretched his ankle, and then afterwards he started having some more ankle pain. And I brought him to his doctor, and the doctor said his ankle is hypermobile, and therefore, in order for the tissues in the ankle to heal, he needed to be in a boot for 4 weeks and completely unload the foot. And I was like, there was no imaging, no nothing. This was just like, watch his ankle move and decide. And I was just very confused and this is why I said it has to make clinical sense, right? Like, this didn't make any clinical sense to me because, I mean, like, there's in essence like a little bit of a flare there. It kind of came down after a little bit of rest, and he had it once before, and he rested for like 3 or 4 days and it completely went away and he was able to load again. So I was just like confused. And I actually reached out to Dr. Collins, who we're going to have on the podcast in about 3 weeks. And he was like, no, I would like never make this kind of decision without some sort of imaging. Right. And I very, very much trust Dr. Collins and his opinions. He's one of the best doctors I've ever worked with. And so I tried to get him to actually have him do a virtual visit. Dr. Collins was very accommodating to make it work out, but it didn't work out for both ends. So he ended up trusting his doctor, going through it, and now he just got out of the boot. We've been loading, everything's been fine. I gave him as much guidance as I could and let him know this is what I would do, but ultimately it's up to you if to make the decision. And he did go down that route. And so I mean, I just feel like it was like in essence, right? Like it's almost like 4 weeks of wasted time because I mean, like we're still able to train, we worked around it. But now we have issues, right? In my opinion, this is what I told him was like 4 weeks of unloading the ankle, right? Like you're gonna come out stiff, it's gonna be weaker, right? We're gonna have to probably do more work. And throughout the whole process of being in the boot, all the things that we were working on when we first started, and we were only like 2 months in, like all of his like mid and lower back pain like was like almost completely gone. Being in the boot, it came back within like 1 or 2 weeks. And then now like he's out of the boot and all of a sudden like now his pain is starting to come back down. Right. So like I'm not gonna call them consequences, but there are things that can happen when we're in a boot. And if it's not, I feel like those are things like when you're telling someone to be like not in a like we're gonna unload it, we're gonna be in a boot, we need to take 3 weeks off. It needs to be very, very clinically relevant. And you probably should have tried some other stuff right before we say, let's like completely deload this tissue and give it an opportunity to recover before we start to then reintroduce load. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I don't know if I mentioned this on our previous podcast, but after we had the wonderful Ben Stevenson on, I've been chatting with him, somewhat regularly since then. And even prior to then, that's how we got him on. And it's been nice to just reconnect with that dude. He's super smart. And he had commented on one of the posts I made a few weeks ago when we were talking about exercise, prescription, and dosage. And he had these wonderful sort of categories that I've really been using to explain things to patients, right? The way he approached it was he has exercises or things that he thinks soothe people. He has exercises and things that spare people. And he has exercises and things that stress people. And I love the kind of simplicity of that where, yes, I agree. And this is what I told my client. There's plenty of things that we can do to soothe and spare. And this could be light aerobic activity. This could be modifying positions into kneeling if standing hurts. This might be using machines, right, to spare the area, limit range of motion. But we can still work on your exposure and your conditioning by soothing and sparing. Then over the course of time, as you're doing that and you're seeing that, hey, I can work around this, I can strength train, I can do this, I can still work towards my
Mhm.
goals. Wow. And now my pain has continued to lower and lower and lower. Well, then now we can get into this idea of stressing. But I just feel like in the medical space, we're just stuck on rinse repeat with this soothe and spare, soothe and spare, soothe and spare. Oh, you've had pain? Oh, okay. Let's just like bring it
Mm,
down, bring it down, bring it down. Oh, you've had pain? Oh, well, you shouldn't squat, lunge, run, or do anything anymore. And I think that's where the advice really deviates. So I asked just for like some clarifying questions here. I'm like, I totally agree to modify because here's the thing in healthcare also, you and I don't want to just completely bash another healthcare professional because that just loses
Right.
trust with the client themselves. Because then who can we listen to? So I totally agreed with the advice to modify, and I just said, but I don't necessarily agree with the advice to avoid everything. So is there further context I'm missing? Like, are you allowed to walk? Are you allowed to swim? Are you allowed to use the elliptical? And then I reminded him, as an athlete, we don't want to just pull back from everything for 4 weeks because that's actually when you'll see, as you pointed out, changes in tissue, some deconditioning effects actually happening. So, where can we discuss, where is the middle ground? So, yeah, he did clarify that non impact stuff, swimming, and lower impact stuff like walking were totally cool. But here was the other thing that I think was important. I think we're so quick, or most of us are so quick, to just push everything into inflammation, right? So,
Mm.
if you come back, we're going to give you a cortisone injection because that's going to eliminate the inflammation in the area. Well, if there's inflammation in the area, you're probably going to have discomfort in static positions, right? Because it's an active cellular chemical process. You'll probably have night pain. Maybe you feel a little bit more, I don't know, if your whole body is systemically reacting to something, a little bit more malaise or fatigue. He didn't have any of that. He was completely comfortable at rest. He had no issues with sleeping. So this was like the next step in guidance. Well, this doesn't sound like a big inflammatory response. This sounds like a immune response. This sounds like your nervous system response. This sounds like a nerve response, right? To an input that your body appropriately detected. You changed something. I asked you to do this banded hold. Your body picked up on it and was like, oh, this is a new input. New inputs are usually deemed as threatening inputs. So your body's doing exactly what it should do. Push a little bit of pain, tell you, hey man, just, maybe not hold for 30 seconds, hold for 10. Hey, don't do 5 sets of the hip circles. Do 2 sets of the hip circles instead. And I think that's where the gray conversation is that doesn't get talked about enough. Did you try to reach out to the doc, or was the doctor communicative to you at all? Was there any nuance in between, like, he actually ended up identifying?
I will I'll give credit to both my client and the doctor because whatever I would tell my client, he would then bring to his doctor and then they would have a conversation and then make a decision. So I wouldn't say that, like, and he was like, oh, these are all good points, but like, this is still what I believe is the best decision going forward based on his experience and whatnot. So at least there was the conversation was there in and around that. It wasn't between me and the doctor directly. I mean, I would love to just like understand why like that was the case, like to understand a little bit better clinically where he came from. But at least that conversation was there between the two of them so that they can, like make a decision. And then he would come back with me with the information. I'd give him some. And there was probably like 3 or 4 back and forths with him being the middleman before he made a decision, right? Which I think is still a relatively smart way to go about making a decision because you're getting information from both places and you're going to figure out what works best for you and where you're going to go, right? From that perspective. In your case, I'm actually very, very curious. I don't know if you asked your client or not, but why did the soreness feel so threatening to him? Like
Well,
I don't know if you got
right,
there or not, but
right. Well, once he noticed that it was worse after the most recent exercises at home. And the thing that piqued his sort of like radar was there was a little bit more pain, let's just say, with like bending over and squatting down that wasn't necessarily there before. Now, for lack of a better diagnosis, due to his surgery, there's still hip impingement like symptoms, right? So when you're only working with somebody one time, the nuances of like, hey, cut this corner of your car is, sometimes falls on deaf ears, even if you put it in a guided email or whatever, right? So
Mhm.
you start doing things, you have a slight, perturbation in your symptoms. And it's like, well, if I keep doing these things, well, my symptoms are likely to kind of increase. And I don't think that's always the case, which is why I really push people to get more than one data point, right? Get more than one. If we see 2 or 3, now we have like a little bit of a trend. But you might find, like most of my pain patients do, mornings are tough. So when are you doing the exercises? Is it the first thing when you wake up? And then afternoons are a little bit better. I get moving. Even if I don't exercise, I'm just kind of up and about. I go up and down my stairs. I'm walking around my apartment or my house. I get dressed. I take a shower, and just generally I feel a little bit better. Okay, well maybe we need to slide where you're doing your home exercises to more focus in the afternoon or the evening if that's better for you. So we ended up, and this is sort of how I left off with him, and you hinted on this as the first thing that you said is that I just want to make sure that he's being guided down the best possible path. He'd already been through surgery. He's already had multiple re-images on the hip that, again, don't really necessarily show us much change, or other than the fact that, yeah, you have scar tissue there because you had surgery, which would kind of make sense. I said that this is your care and I want you to feel comfortable in your care. So whatever decision you decide, I'll follow suit. If we have to wait 3 or 4 weeks and, start your conditioning process from here as opposed to here, at the end of the day, it's probably not going to make too much of a big deal. But the main worry I have and why I push back a little bit is that I think a lot of those conversations keep us in that spin cycle of, oh, if I have pain, I should shut it down, wait for it to go away. If I have pain, shut it down, wait for it to go away, rather than problem solve it. So he was, sort of like right in the middle. I think I'm going to see him like exactly at the 3 week mark next week, and we'll check in and we'll revisit a couple of things. But it'll be interesting to see how he responds to me now with this pushback going back and forth. So I'm sure that'll be something that I have to
Mhm.
manage as well. But yeah, it was just really interesting that we both kind of had similar stories. And, for the most part, it seems like they turned out well. But I'm only going to usually reach out to doctors and if the patient tells me it's okay. Right.
Mhm.
Like I'm not just going to go, you know, gung ho and, email or go start knocking on doors because, the patient also has to go back to the doctor. And if the patient likes the doctor, I want to maintain their relationship as much as possible too. Right. So he didn't necessarily say yay or nay about that. So I kind of let it go. It seemed like he was happy listening to the doctor's advice, at least for a few weeks. And then by the time we ended up collaborating on schedules with his job and everything else, it was going to probably be about that time for him to come back in anyway. So we'll start fresh next week and hopefully start to see some nice steps towards where he wants to be as a runner and lifter and everything else.
No. Yeah, it's interesting, and I think people listening, if you have stories like this in the past or you're currently dealing with it now, I think, I'd say just like be an educated consumer in your decision making. And, with things like rest or going down the road of a surgery or a cortisone shot, if you're like, I don't really know if I want to do those things, Joe, what you said before, like get some more data points, like that's always an option, right? Like being in a boot, getting a surgery, getting a cortisone shot, those things are going to be there for you 3 weeks down the line, 6 months down the line, a year down the line, right? So you can give it some time unless you really feel like that. Like the caveat I'd give is that the pain is so bad that it's like highly impacting your life. You're not going to work, you're withdrawn from social situations, like it's significantly bad. Then sure, you can go try to speed up the pain like recovery, like bring down your pain response faster by other means. But I know a lot of people, most people prefer not to have the surgery, not to get the shot. Whether or not it's rest, they're probably going to take it. I feel like that's one that they'll take more often than not. But again, I think about it, weigh the options, get the doctor's opinion, get your PT's opinion, your chiro's opinion, whatever it is, and then make a decision. And like I said, that decision to get the shot, the surgery, or offload the joint will always be there. So you can get a few more data points to see what the trajectory of your pain, what that does, and then make the decision from there.
Right. Right. Totally. And like you said, I mean, it's always easier to add. It's harder to subtract. So if you can be patient, take one step at a time rather than running to the surgery, running to the injection. Well, we can't really undo those things. But if we, I think this whole concept of graded exposure is something that, we'll continue to touch on. But I'm realizing that even my own biases were fighting against some of the graded exposure stuff because, a 2 minute walk, was even hard for me to prescribe. Like, really, you can't walk more than 2 minutes? Like, we're that sensitive. But then I'm realizing, like, yeah, like 2 minutes might be the starting point. And because we haven't been accepting that, that's why you're also having some of these mismatched
Mhm.
immune or inflammatory responses in your body. So your last bit of advice too, like, and people give you advice if it doesn't feel right, then yeah, question it. And a lot of times patients will tell me what their doctor said and it'll be similar, like, oh, they just told me to rest for 6 weeks, but that didn't make any sense to me based on anything I've ever heard or anything I've ever read. And that's why I wanted to come into you and get a second opinion. And then other times it's like, yeah, this makes perfect sense. Like I'd never really shut it down. I've always been pushing, right? Maybe that endurance coper mindset. I've always been just trying to work through it. The doc told me my scan was fine, so there's nothing broken. And then once I had that knowledge of, oh, nothing was broken, normal anatomy, but it doesn't mean I have normal biology. And I think that's the stuff that's getting swept under the rug. So, yeah, first fit advice. It's like putting on your sneakers or you're trying on
Uh-huh.
new footwear. If that first feel or first fit is like, wow, this feels great, cool. You found your shoe. Same thing with advice. If that feels good to you, great. You found some good advice that might make a difference. If it doesn't, keep working until it does.
Yeah. And I always, when someone gives me, like, they tell me something and I'm not too sure if it clinically makes sense, yeah, I always tell them, go get a second opinion. Like, nothing stops you from, like, if two doctors tell you the same thing and then you
Totally.
go get a third and three doctors say the same thing, then they're all probably going to be right. You probably should go take that advice. But if you got to start to get like, this doctor says this doctor says this doctor says this, then you start to have to figure out, okay, like what makes most sense to you and then go down one of those paths, stick with that one path, see what happens. And then if that doesn't help, right, then you have to go try some of these other paths, right? Because sometimes, and unfortunately with pain, the answers and the pathways are never linear and smooth going, right? It's never just like one, steep curve to recovery, right? So sometimes there is going to be some exploration to figure out where that line is, right? As you mentioned, right? Like, oh, 2 minute walking is all you can do. Like when you have to explore a little bit and kind of tiptoe the line of pain to figure out, okay, like this is your true starting point. This is what we need to start to do to start to move the needle. And let's take some time to how do we really calm, like in that case, right? If someone's like super sensitive, the calming and the soothing, right, is going to be probably some of the more initial stuff we do. And then as the pain starts to come down, right, a little bit more of the dosing of the poison, as I like to call it,
Yeah.
starts to build up in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well, I spoke my piece. I actually was more, I think you calmed me,
I think I
Joe.
did because I was expecting a
Yeah.
lot more gung ho out of you in
Yeah.
this for this
Yeah. No,
conversation.
you calm me down. Your rational thought process and just soothing
I should
voice
let you go
really.
first. It would have been
Yeah.
good
Well,
content.
it took me from a
IG
9
content,
to,
you know?
yeah, it took me from a 9 to a 6 real quick. I was like, wow, Joe made a nice, beautiful point there. I'm glad I just didn't start yelling. So thank you for that, Joe. And I'm sure our listeners appreciate that too, rather than me just screaming in everyone's ear. But
Yeah.
yeah, if that's all we got, we'll close it there. Joe, we love you. Listeners, we love you. And don't forget to come back next week for another exciting episode of the Beyond Pain podcast.